Hello and welcome to Property Matters, a weekly look at all matters property designed to be of interest to anyone who has an interest in the property market. Property Matters is supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and Town and Country Property Auctions London. Each week we focus on the property stories that are making the news, and we'd love you to get involved by adding your comments in the comments section below wherever you're watching us today. And don't forget, of course, to like and subscribe to the page so you get notifications of when we go live each week. You can also email us if you wish, propertymatterstv@gmail.com. And joining us as always for Property Matters, our property expert, Joe Joshi. Good morning, Joe.
Good morning, Paul. Good morning to all our viewers and listeners, wherever you are. Another an exciting week in property, of course, always controversial, but profitable. That's what I would say. Good to always invest in the best form of investment you can get.
And this week has been a significant week. Of course, we had this last week, should I say, we had the Tory party conference, and everyone was looking to the new Minister for Levelling Up and Communities and, and housing, we forgot that bit, to come up and talk about his new ideas on housing and planning reform. And from the 1,300-word speech, we got fewer than 100 words on the subject of property, and very little detail, according to the press, on anything to do with housing. So bit of a disappointment, really. Lots of, somebody described it as a bit like watching an Instagram post and one of those motivational things. You kind of read it, but you don't really understand what it means. But the truth of the matter is that since 2016, Joe, the government department that Mr. Gove now heads up has had 4 different permanent secretaries of state and undergone 2 name changes. But the one thing, says the press, that still remains the same is Britain still has a housing emergency. So there's a lot of disappointment this week that he failed to address reports about the planning reform that he was planning to, or considering changing, should I say. The speech had very little to do with anything other than the fact that they're not going to do what Mr. Jenrick said, which is to put power in the hands of developers and build all over the southeast, which, if you listen to some southern Tories, would be the suggestion.
Yes, I mean, the thing with Mr. Gove coming in at this last minute is, and changing, of course, the name of the actual division, really told us straight away that he hasn't got a clue as to what he intends to do or what his actual mandate is going to be. I think it was just a case of, we've got to put him somewhere, so let's stick him into the housing. I think that's how they treat housing to a large extent. Being in the property business as long as I've been, as you rightly say, just in the recent times, the number of people that have been in charge of housing. And, the annoying thing about it from my point of view is that, considering the amount of coffers the housing market actually lines the treasury with, year in, year out, and the amount of people that invest in property, we always get these sort of shoveled people that come along and think that they now are going to come along and fix something. But actually, the truth of it is, it doesn't really need fixing. It needs some sort of direction, and every one of them are the wrong direction because their agenda is elsewhere, and Gove is probably no different to that. His skill set is probably not actually set in housing. So subsequently, they've got to put him somewhere, and that's why the first thing he did is change the name, because he hasn't got a clue on the housing side of it at all. And yes, there is always been a crisis as far as the governments are concerned on the housing, but it's the crisis that keeps the interest and the business flowing, to be perfectly honest with you, Paul. If there was no crisis, there wouldn't be an issue, and they wouldn't be pushing such a so-called high-profile minister into these kind of jobs to try and say, oh, look, go and do this. So I think the crisis is actually the reason why the housing market has sustained itself throughout the pandemic and just generally. I mean, there's the government sort of said that it's not sort of what they wanted to do is have a generation of buyers as opposed to generations of renters. And that tells you that their whole drive is for people ultimately to own. And there is not, I mean, you can stand on any street and do a survey and ask 10 people or 100 people, what is their ultimate dream? when it comes to buying or renting a property, I think you'll find that buying a property, a home ownership, will probably outstrip any questionnaire, because that's ultimately what everybody wants to do. And it doesn't matter how many generations you go through, even to the point where, in the modern world, when I listen and speak to sort of the younger people, their whole view about matrimony, for example, is not what it used to be. But ultimately, um, they still want that, as they see that as the goal, as to a future, or having family and creating that hub of family, and marriage is probably still the ultimate wish that they would have in order to create that sort of family unit. And it's the same with property. Property is, and home ownership is still the ultimate in what they should have. I mean, yes, they'll rent, and yes, they'll cohabitate and all that sort of stuff. But in an ideal world, the deal, the seal that sort of seals the deal, as they say, is ownership of a home. Ultimately, walking down the aisle and going, "I do," is what really makes somebody feel that this is what they've been ultimately aiming for throughout their life, throughout their work life, their education life, their social network, the society, the dating, the people, whatever you want to go, the whole process. But it climatizes right at those points. And that's the housing market in the UK. And it doesn't matter where you come from, what part of the world you come from. As far as I'm concerned, that's the wish that everybody has. And you'll see that as time goes on, that people from all over the world continue to not only here, and we've covered this before, haven't we? Where it's shockingly and surprising, there are other places in the world that rank higher than where we are as the 10th place, where people ultimately want to buy their home, or build their home, build their dream home. So housing is a key thing. And people like Gove that have been given such a position are only looking at the home stuff, in other words, the stuff in the UK. And yes, I think obviously there's always going to be policy changes, but their driver, and everyone tells us that they're going to look at changing the housing market, raise the stock, because we're behind on the stock. But that stock being the reason, is the reason in my mind where we have the supply and demand. And as long as the supply is restricted through planning, through policy changes, through minister changes, through opinions, through views, that demand will continue, and we will be ever at that point. And that's not a bad thing, because I know that some of the areas that we're going to cover, we will see the benefits of exactly that situation, and that the government also sees. And so they push everybody around this job just because, but actually they haven't really, in my time, got somebody that's come in and went, right, I know what to do with housing. Let's say, for example, could be me, Paul, I could be the next minister, really. I mean, I've been selling and buying and dealing with property for 40 years. I've probably got more clue than Gove has, in order to try and, direct that, because we are people on the front line, and understand what the demands are. These guys haven't got a clue. They're in that bubble, they're in that tower where they sort of think, okay, well, this is what I should do and that's what I should do. But really, they are not touching and feeling and seeing on the forefront of what people really want to hear and see. And when they do, they never get to that point. And I'm sure there'll be people saying that, you know, I'm probably wrong in that, and the government's got everything right. But if that was the case, then we wouldn't have people changing names of the housing, and we would get more than one word of housing mentioned in speeches of high profile people, because fundamentally they haven't got a clue.
He said he wanted levelling up to deliver strengthened local leadership, whatever that means, an increase in living standards and improved public services in more deprived areas, and people given the necessary resources to restore local pride. On housing, Gove said the government will invest in urban regeneration to put new homes on neglected brownfield sites, while at the same time helping more of those who currently rent to own their own homes. Well, I mean, as far as I can see, it's always been the policy to build on brownfield sites as much as possible and regenerate those areas. And the other thing I think is quite interesting is this allowing more people to rent who rent currently to own their own home. Well, didn't Margaret Thatcher do that with the right to buy policy? And that's now widely acknowledged as the reason why we have a social housing shortage in the first place. So what is Gove's plan to increase home ownership today? Because they're not meeting the building targets. So where's all these houses that people are going to buy coming from? Particularly in the light of the fact that actually more and more people are investing in second properties to rent out.
And that's again, that brings me to the point why the housing market is as strong as it is, because people are buying second homes, or the buy to let market was exposed some 15, 20 years ago now, when it actually became okay to rent. To wind the tape back a little bit, when I started in this in the 1980s, people used to buy a property in different family members' names because they couldn't actually own more than one property. And then somebody came along and said, let's do buy to let. And then obviously, whatever was happening in families and generations, that then sort of, okay, well, I don't need 10 members of my family now to own a property for me or hold it for me, because that created its own issues. I can now do this all by myself. And I think the number was up to 5 properties. That's how they started it. You could actually buy 4 others apart from the one that you lived in. So you had to have a property that you owned before you qualified for a buy to let property, and you could buy up to 4 other properties and rent them out. Of course, that then changed as time went on to people buying them into a entity, for example, a limited company or a partnership or whatever that circle would be. And that became 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 to hundreds, where people now look at that and think, well, actually, I've got that vehicle, I've got the right to be able to go and buy and rent more properties. And subsequently, it took out the stock that was available in the marketplace. And the people that suffered the most on that were the first time buyers, because, the investor always outbid the first time buyer, because the investor had a portfolio and subsequently had the deposit available to be able to buy the next one and the next one and the next one. And so the people that actually didn't actually succeed in that was, the first time buyers. And the first time buyers are the people that start the first run of the ladder on the housing market. And without them, we are always going to be stumped as to how the chain goes. But an interrupter came, or a disruptor came into that, and that was the buy to let, because the investor thought, well, actually, I've got £100,000, £200,000 sitting in my account, because I inherited it, or I've saved it, or I've got a redundancy pay, however they got that money. They were then using that money as a part of deposit. So I remember at one time, up to £100,000, if you had, theoretically, you needed to put £25,000. So you may or may not remember, there was a time when self-cert came along. So people just turned around and say, yeah, I earned that. And the lenders, for the 2007 financial crash, were lending people money on the basis that as long as they had 25 grand, they could buy. So if somebody had £100,000, he was buying 5 property because he's got 25 grand a pop to put down on each one, and so the market went absolutely gaga in terms of that. So that shortage came in for a number of reasons why people were starting to invest, and so we're never going to catch up. There's no catch up, because, as I've always said before, there is no other tool, there is no other mechanism, there is no other way that the average man on the street today can invest their money to get a good return and feel safe. And if Mr. Gove wants to do something, then that's what he really needs to do in order to help his housing market. But guess what? He's not going to do that, because why should he? He needs the housing market to continue to do what it does, and for him to shuffle paper around his desk, and find another name for it. And he'll probably come up with a new title in about 2-3 months, because he's going to be exhausted.
Gove said he was an optimist, believes we can build hundreds of thousands of new homes in this country, but he also admitted that in recent years they hadn't been well designed, which is an interesting comment. And the Tory party chairman, Oliver Dowden, conceded the government was looking again at the planning reform proposals launched by Boris and Robert Jenrick. Dowden said the Conservative Party had the wisdom to listen to people and the humility to learn how we can do better, and that the government wasn't proposing to rip up planning controls. But the truth of the matter is that Jenrick's controls were deeply unpopular, particularly in the south, because they thought that that was giving control, or that if they had gone ahead with that proposal, that it would have given control to developers and not to local people. And of course, if you look at Dominic Raab, who's the MP for Esher and Walton, all of those local people there thinking, hang on a minute, you're not building where we live, there's enough building here already, thank you very much. And he admitted in a meeting that he thought it was very difficult to sell levelling up as a concept, and also Jenrick's housing policy, to the people of Esher and Walton, because they won't support the building in the backyard. And similarly, they are arguing to him, he says, that because they live in the southeast and work in the capital, many of them, they're contributing to the industrial engine of the south, and contributing the most tax to the system. So the whole levelling up thing, what's in it for them? So the truth of the matter is, we've had a situation where we put somebody called Robert Jenrick in charge. Excuse me. In a year, he comes up with a plan that is so unpopular that now we've got to spend another year, presumably, unpicking all of that, and we're back to square one again. And the truth of the matter is, it doesn't matter what all the rhetoric says at the beginning; it's what the local constituents in the parties in the south actually really want that matters.
Yes, of course, because their constituencies are the people in the south, and if you pick places like Esher and so forth, which are lovely, be beautiful areas, very green, very country, very suburban. Why would they want more housing there? Why would they want to do that? We have that similar scenario in the areas that, we live. We've got the same scenario. We've got areas around us that just don't want to have buildings done, and they want to preserve the green and the nice areas in the countryside. And when it comes to any social housing or any housing development, they palm it all off to the bigger towns, and so subsequently they end up with blocks and blocks of flats, which are probably not as healthy for families, but no choice. It's a case of that's what you're going to get, and that's what's available. So I can't really see how he's going to fix anything, to be perfectly honest with you, unless and until they start to look at. Back in the sort of late 60s, 70s, Paul, they built new towns. There was 5 new towns that were built. And they were the roundabout world, and you've probably been around a few of them yourself. And that was also the same scenario. Here's some land, here we are, and let's create some new towns. And and really, in essence, that's probably what they really got to do in order to maybe start to consider. They've literally got to create an area and just say to themselves, let's redo what we did then and build and create another new town or a neighbouring town. And of course, they'll be up in arms for that part, but at least the pain will be only lessened by the fact that it's one area, as opposed to every time an application goes in somewhere and they get a hassle in those areas that they think they want to continue to preserve. Sometimes you look back and they think, why would you want to do that? Because at the end of the day, people want to live here and they want to do that. But as I drive around the country, which I do quite a lot, I do appreciate the benefits that it does have, and perhaps it is those governances that allow us to enjoy the green pastures that we actually do enjoy as we drive around, because you actually value it until you get in. But there's so much more that they could do with the towns, and so much more that they could allow the local towns to actually get on with. But the government actually took away some of that when they brought in, under the permitted development rights, to be able to convert perhaps old office buildings into residential flats. Never the twain shall meet. The local council were absolutely up in arms because they got no control over that. And the people that were building them, some of them built some really nice, sympathetic opportunities. but there was a whole bunch that built a lot of rubbish. And it's, again, unfortunately, it's always what sells. Bad news sells. So the rubbish is what actually people highlight and say, look at what we've got to live in. But they actually never identify some of the nicer, sympathetic conversions that have been done and utilized and preserved the environment, the location, and the buildings in that area. So something that was perhaps locally listed or listed and converted inside still made it look quite nice on the outside, but yes, it may gave more residential opportunities inside. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, but because the two are always at loggerhead, the government generally, and of course the local council, that is something that they've got to actually address and deal with. And I think that's probably a better challenge for him to try and do than to try and fix something that actually isn't broke.
Well, we shall see over the coming months what comes out of the new housing levelling up and whatever else is under the umbrella of Mr. Gove's responsibility in the next few months. So let's just take a look at what's been happening in the market. There's been a notable increase in available residential property listings across the country, according to property data firm Home Search. New sales instructions in September were up 6.5% month on month. August, they say, was a typical traditional late summer market and have now seen increased activity in September. Christmas is always seen as the real deadline in the property market, and it's the September sellers who are most serious about hitting it. Sales agreed numbers were also up 8.9% from September to August. And perhaps most interestingly, there were 50% more price reductions recorded in September than in August. And that's really the point that I was going to sort of highlight with this story, really is about pricing. Because obviously we're in a upward spiral, have been for many months, as we've revealed on this program many, many times. And it's all about valuation at the end of the day, isn't it, Joe? But these are encouraging numbers.
Yes, I mean, again, we're talking about a traditional time of the year. We know that July, August tends to slow down, primarily because holidays and children are a good driving factor. When you've got kids at home, the last thing you've got in mind is to go and troops around property. But this particular year, apart from the pandemic, the completions that had to happen at the end of June, we found that a lot of July was really quiet because they were all unpacking their goods into their new homes and doing the DIYs and doing the gardens and decorating and all that kind of good stuff to make it happen. So I don't think there was going to be anything, but traditionally September, October, November, early December is sort of the last window of the year, primarily for those that want to see things happen and conclude for Christmas. And again, for the same reason, it's a longer stay at home, so it allows people to then think, right, well, if I can complete by Christmas or prior, I can, I can enjoy the turkey, which I'm not sure everybody's going to have this year, by the way.
Absolutely.
Enjoy the turkey on the new dining table at the new address and the new location, and the family can all come over. And also that longer period to perhaps, do a bit of titivating and decorating and whatever else you want to do, and going into the new year with a new vigor of new home, new life, new year, new start, new everything that people tend to want to have is kind of a target for the end of the year. That's what I'd like to achieve. So I think that window is here. And why there is an uplift in the number of listings is because simply because of that. People are now sort of planning towards moving towards the end of the year or just before, and subsequently and then, of course, it comes to the values. Of course, the values will start to be realistic, perhaps. They were pushed quite high during the demanding period of up to the stamp duty. Though those that did benefit the stamp duty probably actually didn't benefit in the underlying figures, because the values of what they were buying were increased by pure demand. And now there will be a massive correction in the marketplace. in order to sort of warrant what is back to kind of normal for what it's worth. I'm not sure what normal is at the moment because we've had so much abnormal in the last 2 years, 2.5 years now. So we will find what is the new normal. Maybe we should give normal a new name as well, like Mr. Gove has, and find we should create that on this program, Paul, and find what that new normal is going to be in terms of the housing market. Um, and go from there. But yes, I'm not surprised that there's an increase in listings, no doubt about that. And of course, the demand is still there. And demand still outstrips because people just won't stop investing in the ultimate dream of having their own home.
Well, they're saying that although there's an increase in the number of instructions, it's still coming from an incredibly low base. So it's still a really, really strong seller's market at the moment. And they're saying the market is buoyant. The prices actually increased by 0.89% last month across the country. So it's a less than 1% increase in price. But they are suggesting that because there's more data now coming out of the Land Registry and HMRC on this year so far, and in particular sort of June, July time when things are at their peak, people are now able to base their conversations on price with their agent more around facts and data than they are opinion, because obviously in June, July time, there was very little data from that period of time available. So now we've got the benefit of the data, which much of which we looked at last week, in fact. So they can actually have some sensible conversations around prices that other properties have sold in their region or their area. But they still predict that over the next 12 months, nonetheless, that even with inflation on the up, they will still think that the property will outperform inflation as it's done for many months now. So it's all in all quite a buoyant situation, but probably just business as usual, I would suggest.
Yeah, I mean, and the reason why property will outperform inflation is simply, again, because people have the comfort and the confidence in buying a home, and it's a great investment. You can't do better than bricks and mortar. Every term you can think about, safest houses, bricks and mortar, this, that, the other, they all come into it primarily because that's how people feel. They feel that, even if it's sitting there empty and doing nothing, at least it's something that I can say, well, we own that, we have some interest in that. And that's why it will continue. And we've seen that at the worst, one of the worst times in our history, when you've had a pandemic and we've had losses of lives and God knows how many catastrophes and how we've had to do shops shut, businesses shut, everything shut. One thing that has sustained itself, obviously, is the housing market. And the reason why it's done that is because we've built our way out. Because every time there's a crisis in the world, wherever that crisis is, everybody starts to build. And you can pick any country in the world where they have disasters, and when there's a disaster, there has to go back and rebuild, and there's investment going on in that. So they build it, and that's exactly what the conservatives have sort of hooked onto in this last couple of years, and said that we're going to pump money into this, and we're going to give the stamp duty breaks, and it's motivated people. Though ultimately we know the statistics have shown that it was not ultimately the stamp duty part, but the stamp duty was the leverage that gave them. It was the lost leader in the shopping centre that said, "Oh, if you go and buy now, you're going to save on stamp duty." And because you're saving on stamp duty, people thought, right, well, I'm going to go and buy this. But ultimately, what's happened is that the prices have increased beyond what was or potentially would have been the saving. Nevertheless, it's motivated the market to such a point that it will continue to outstrip the inflation because there is a huge demand in that.
This next story, Joe, really did appeal to my sense of humour. So the boomerang property buyers is the new phrase that everyone's talking about, apparently, because when the pandemic started, everybody decided that they wanted to move out of town, so they all flocked to the country as the race for space began. Now, guess what? Now they're back at work and they've got to go back to their offices, and the reality of the daily commute has suddenly struck. Guess what everybody wants now? A bolt hole in London. That's top of the list of requirements according to Knight Frank. Some people purchase property outside of London in the belief that the daily commute was a thing of the past, but the direction of travel now is back to the office, and it would appear that some of those who moved outside the M25 now face a more regular and lengthy commute, making a London base far more important. Q3 2021, the group represented 9.5% of the total, down slightly from 10.4% in the second quarter of this year. The vast majority of buyers coming from outside of London are looking for a bolt hole rather than to up sticks and return to the capital en masse. All of a sudden, the daily commute looks a bit tougher as the need to get back with the office becomes more apparent. Quite amusing, but I find it hard to believe that people will be that shallow in their thought process when they decide to move out into the country. But maybe I'm wrong.
Not at all. Not at all. Because time tells every story, doesn't it? It's just about and we are unfortunately a bit like sheep. We follow what we need to go and do, and then all of a sudden realize that maybe we need to do a bit of a U-turn and come off that trail, and that's what happens. And yes, the race for space, which was and is the new buzzword of getting out of town, became the norm. Everybody needed to go. The pandemic was there. I don't want to be anywhere near people. Need to go into the country. Need good connection with the internet, and I can carry on doing whatever I can from wherever it is. But then reality always comes in, and you've got to get somewhere. And I can tell you from a personal experience, it is a complete nightmare out on the roads right now. So all those people that were living in the city have now come out into the suburbs, and the traffic jams are huge. So maybe it's not a bad thing for them to go back and get a bolt hole and go back in on the train and go back into the city, because they are causing a lot of traffic in the race for space area outside the capital. But yes, time is the value here. Time is money, and you've got to realize that if you're having to travel back in and you're traveling, and that cost is immense. I mean, I was talking to somebody recently, and they said that the season ticket is for the year is just stupid money. We're talking, £10,000 or thereabouts for everyday commuting, traveling, and so forth. And more what they're having to fund, and even now, if they're doing a couple of days worth of traveling, they're still cheaper off, better off buying a season ticket, which is cost them more. So even though they've moved out and have this lovely world outside, to travel in for 2 days is just as expensive as it is to travel in for 5 days. So you may as well start to go back in. Of course, the next thing happens is, of course, everything has gone up in price because of the shortages and because advantages. I mean, dare I touch on the petrol subject, but for 145, 149, £1.49, £1.50 for a gallon of diesel, from 130 is colossal. But some say it's taking advantage, and some say it is the needs must. But the reality is that everything has gone, north in terms of prices, and so subsequently it's become expensive to accommodate where you are, and that's going to involve in services as well, Paul. I mean, look at the services; they're following through. And here on Property Matters, we'll cover, what is happening on things like the gas and the electric and the supplies and the utilities, which are talked about in a heavy way. And it kind of brings me onto a completely separate subject, which I'll touch on. The whole world wants to go electric, yet we can't find enough electric now to just fire up our light bulbs in the houses, because there's a crisis going on for supply. So it's going to be a continuing saga of what it is. I think everything in moderation is better, but we do tend to sort of fall onto one side of the scale. And today, I mean, go back 10 years, 15 years, diesel cars were everything. So that's what everybody did. Everybody went and bought a diesel car. Now electric is the case. So people turn around and be smug while petrol lines are there, and the guy in the electric car with his pie and says, I've got an electric car. But soon he's not going to have enough electric to put electric in his car. and so forth, and so everything should happen in a moderation. But we just tend to go with the flow and go, this is the way it's going to be. And I think that's where the boomerang thing is, that we all went with this race for space. Let's go out because that's what we got to do. But in reality, now the reality checks are coming and they're thinking, okay, I need to come back in. So bolt hole is not a bad idea. It's a question of where. And guess what? Who is going to suffer on the bolt hole pool? The bolt hole is going to suffer for the first time buyers, because the people that are going to buy those bolt holes are people that are buying potentially smaller studio, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom apartments where they can afford to just lock up and go away, are the ones that are going to come off the market. They're the ones that they're going to buy. And then the people that want to buy those, i.e. the first time buyers that step in the market, are going to be actually pushed out because the bolt hole prices will go up.
Mm.
So long may the boomerangs continue for people like me, because that's the way it works.
Absolutely right. The areas that they're most focusing on, just to clarify, Belsize Park, Queen's Park, and the South London markets like Wandsworth. That's where the activity apparently is most excitable. The other area I wanted to talk about was an interesting letter that came from a guy called John Bagley, who's a director of risk and compliance at Countrywide Surveying Services, and he was talking about the valuation market at the moment. There's an interesting point around this, because obviously, it's been a very excitable market this year for pricing because of various reasons, which we've got into many, many times. But he's making the contention in this article, there's no such thing as down valuation. Because obviously in a quickly changing market, you've got rising prices, or of course you could have conversely falling prices. And those marketplaces, when they're like that, always present challenges. There's expectation and then reality in terms of a house price, which may or may not be met when the house finally goes on the market. But of course, you've got the agents on one side and the expectations of the seller saying, I'm going to get a fantastic price for this place. And then you've got somebody who's sat on the other side who basically is sitting there looking at a different set of data saying, well, houses in this street have sold for X or Y in recent months, and then adding in the factors of about the pricing in the market at the moment. I think the house is worth this much. So inevitably, there's always going to be a collision in terms of opinion. And then there's the down valuation that comes as a result of it. But in fact, the reality is, as he's suggesting here, that a particular asset is or isn't worth what somebody says. And therefore, there's no such thing as down valuation, because actually one person was wrong and the other one was right. But the counter argument that people have put to this week, which it's been an interesting discussion, is that actually, is this not a time for us to think about a kind of national valuation service where we actually had a proper set of guidelines and an official central place where you could get a valuation of property so people knew where they stood?
I think we need a new name here, don't we, Paul? I think we need to change down valuation, and I take Mr. Gove's direction on calling it leveling of the valuation, or something along those lines. Because obviously, it's just something that exists. It doesn't really happen. I have to say that it's a very interesting subject, and I know every so often you bring a subject that has a personal opinion on it from me. So this is a personal opinion from me on this one. Down valuation has existed, does exist, and has been there for as long as I've been in the business. It's valuation and property purchase is really what a home is worth and what somebody's prepared to pay for it. So a property is worth what somebody's prepared to pay for it. That is the reality. Now, supply and demand kicks in, but unfortunately for us as agents and properties dealers as such, the problem in our life, the thorn in our side, if you want to call it that, is the surveyor, who actually is the umpire, in my opinion, of our game of cricket. He is the fella that completely buggers up your entire life and work, because it's his opinion at that time that it's worth X, and he'll never budge from it. In my history, I might have had about 5 people after a lot of argument in the former years, to be able to get them to maybe could reconsider. But unfortunately, we never had whatever they call it, VCR or AVR or whatever, to see if the ball was out or the ball is in, and all that kind of stuff in cricket now. But unfortunately, for the term of a valuer, the surveyor who is instructed by the building society for the building society and not for the buyer or for the seller. Most buyers pay a valuation fee on their mortgage application, but they don't pay it for their benefit. They pay it for the benefit of the lender to employ someone who's going to go out there and bugger your life up, basically, because he's going to give an opinion that is unchangeable, and that is the down valuation. So down valuation exists because there are people that just go out there and down value because that's what they do. That's what they're paid to do. And that will mess up the whole process of the home buying process. And it's happened forever. It's just existed forever and a day. And I can't see why somebody's saying there's no such thing as down valuation. It is a matter of opinion, and it's an opinion of 2 people. But unfortunately, your opinion and my opinion could change because we are ordinary people that think, okay, if I should have to pay a bit more, then I shall have to pay a bit more. Or if I have to, this a lot of work needs doing to this house, I need to readjust that because of this. But the surveyor that is employed by the building society, paid for by the mortgage application person, the applicant, is only doing it on the basis that that is his opinion or her opinion at that time, and they do a down valuation. Now, how do they come to that down valuation? That's the interesting thing, isn't it? Because it's the same way. How does an agent come to a valuation to market the property in the first place? Now, never the twain shall meet. The agent and the valuer just don't see eye to eye because the valuer thinks that basically he is mightier than mighty. He's got the qualifications. He's gone and done his survey reports, and he's done his accolade for Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors or whatever else that they need to be part of in order to do that. Guy Charrison will probably come in now and give me a bit of a hard time on that. But, the reality is they have that qualification. So all of a sudden they are able to say, and what they say, that's why I call them the umpires in our game of cricket. If they say it's out, it's out. And how do they justify it? Well, because they went to college and school and they got a degree to say that they've got this to be able to justify it. And so subsequently, that's their out. We are qualified chartered surveyors who've been employed by the building society on behalf of them to tell you that what you're buying is not worth it. That's it. That's the long and the short of it. Number of those valuers in my life that have phoned me up after they've been to a property and then said, could you tell me, and have you got comparable evidence of things that are sold within that? We give them all the comparable evidence to show why we came to that valuation in the first place and how we managed to achieve the good price. And guess what? He puts the phone down and goes, oh, fuck it, I'll just take 20 grand off of that because that's how I'm going to justify my existence. Excuse my language. But that's what they tend to do. It's just like they've got to justify their existence. So that thing always has been, and that's the down valuation. So whoever's written it saying there's no such thing as a down valuation needs to check on that part of it. But it does exist, and it does bugger up the system, and maybe it does help them, be a moderator in the game of valuation. But a property is worth what someone's prepared to pay for it. And how do estate agents come to that price? Well, they come to that price in the first place based on demand. If an area is of demand and people want to buy property there, it is what pushes the prices up. If 3 properties sold in that road at that sort of price, the next one naturally is going to come up for a bit more. And it continues to go for that. But the valuer comes along and says, oh no, the last 4 sold for X, so you've got to just bring it back to that as well. So they just sort of pull on the reins to bring it back and say, oh, let's keep the market a bit level. But the buyers are saying, well, I like it. I want it. I like that garden. I like this, whatever it is. And I'm prepared to pay the extra 5, 10, 15, 20,000 pounds to own that property because it suits me. So it's worth what is prepared to pay for. So the down valuations do exist, and there's no rhyme or reason that's ever going to change. It's just a battle. And very, very rarely will a surveyor ever come back to us and say, actually, you know what? you're right. I've actually made a mistake, so I'll change it. There's more chance of me being struck by lightning than that happening.
The suggestion is in the article that down valuation actually is merely just a resetting of expectations in terms of where the market value lands compared to the initial figure. But the percentage of cases where this actually happens is quite low, so there really isn't that much to worry about. And market value is an internationally recognised value definition. But it seems to me that there might be an argument that says, actually, if we were to seek the value of the property officially from the valuer before it's even put on the market, that would eradicate the problem, surely.
Yes and no, because you can do that and spend the money, and so take the estate agent out for the minute and go straight to the valuer and ask the valuer to come in, who's going to charge you probably £500 or whatever it is to come in and do the same process. Sellers are just not prepared to pay for that. They'll take the risk. And even if they do, guess what? You're going to like this one. Another valuer will be coming in because his opinion will state that it may be that the first valuer has overvalued it, so he has to be correct and bring it back down. So then the argument comes is, I've just parted with 500 quid to get a qualified professional valuer to put a valuation, and I've gone with their guidance, but now another one has come in for the purpose of lending on behalf of the building society, which may be XYZ company, and he says, or she says, it's 10% less. How do you then qualify for the qualification? So I hear the argument, and we've often said that that could be a way of going forward. But as you rightly said at the opening of this particular subject, it is an opinion, and an opinion of another person. So a second or third or whatever valuer, and we've had that. We've had that each time we've sold a property and a different lender has come along. There's always a varying of what that. So it is a matter of opinion of the person that's visiting. So if I say it's worth £150,000, you would probably go and say, well, actually, Joe's wrong. I'll just say there's £145,000 because of the damper, because of this. And that then knocks the deal out. We sell it again for £150,000, and a third person comes along and says, I'll buy it. And then that valuer says, actually, even the last one was wrong. I think it's only worth £140,000. Very rarely have I actually had someone say, look, actually, Joe's really right on that, and I think it should be 155 as opposed to 150. So I'll up value it. There is no up valuation, is there? There's always a down valuation.
Yeah, absolutely. It does seem, again, rooted in archaic practice in the same way that we were talking about the conveyancing process being so old-fashioned. We have actuaries, actual computer programs that set the level of risk for life insurance, for example, and basing the data on life expectancy and so on and variable social factors, so that we can actually buy insurance at an agreed and universal price, if you want to call it that, for the company that you're talking to. So it doesn't seem dissimilar to me to think of the fact that actually we could have a computer-based software that takes all the data fed into it about the market and how it is month by month, and actually then creates the value of the properties. And then you've just got one person who comes round on behalf of both buyer and seller, who then just looks at the actual property and the state it's in and puts that against the database. That seems to me to be a little bit more reliable and less witch doctor factor way of doing things.
Well, I mean, if you look at now, there's so many tools on the marketplace for us as estate agents that you don't have to. You have to get out of bed, to be perfectly honest with you, because the system tells you how a valuation is calculated on that particular property. But I can tell you personally that there is still a huge difference on when you stand there and look at that, and there's no system or even Google Earth, which is a marvelous tool in order to be able to identify a spot or a location or street view or all these other technical tools that are available. They do not and will not allow for what you feel when you stand there. It just doesn't happen, Paul. And I've done that for all my life now. I can tell you that I've travelled yesterday to a property that we will show shortly, and my view would probably be different to what it would be when I've stood there now than what it was perhaps when I looked at it in the first place. And it's the same for a property I went over to Colchester, which is on our books in auction, in our next auction. And again, same thing, amazing place, amazing location, but needs a lot doing to it, which cannot and will not be able to be viewed by any tool that is created other than being there yourself. And so that value of actually turning up and standing there, and I still say to every buyer that we get, go and stand at that location and see if you like the environment, see if you like the surroundings, because I can't tell you how you're going to feel about the environment that surrounds. The property itself might be perfect, but where it is located may not suit a number of things that you might be looking for yourself. So how do you encounter for all the tools that are existing for the actual feeling? It's a bit like, I know it's a silly really analogy, but if you decide to buy an overcoat, and you decide that you've seen it online with John Lewis or whoever you buy your overcoat from, and it looks good, and then it turns up in the post, and you arrive, and if you put it on and it's just too baggy or too big or too saggy, or it just doesn't feel, what are you going to do? You're going to shove it in the same thing and send it back. But there's a difference when you actually go into the store, you pick it up off the hanger and you put it on. It either feels great and feels good and it feels snug and it's right, or it's wrong. And if it's wrong, you're going to put it straight back on the hanger and leave it at that. And that is the only way I can describe to you that sometimes you've got to wear a property. You've got to stand there and feel it and feel that, is this my home? Is this where I want to live? This is where I want to bring my children up. Is this, the environment that I've been looking for? Does this feel comfortable? And you can't do that with any tool that any man is ever going to create. I'm sure somebody will come up with a virtual wear your coat situation, but it will still never be the same.
Well, you mentioned properties. It's a great time to have a look at Property of the Week this week. And this is Hunts Hill, which you describe as a grand designs project. So that was of interest, immediately piqued my interest when I saw that on the page. So tell us a little bit about this. Is the aerial shot of Hunts Hill.
Yeah, so this is Hunts Hill. It's basically Swindon, just on the outskirts of Swindon. Fantastic. I actually drove there yesterday, Paul. This is one of the ones I was telling you about earlier on that I actually drove there. Superb location. I mean, just leafy, country lane, all of the above wish list, tick list that anybody would want. Nice plot. The reason I call it grand design is because the design that you'll see in a minute is very much the look of what you see on grand designs. It's been creative and created to look pretty modern and state of the art in its appearance, and have the supply of all of the gadgetry that one would want. But if you look at its environment is very leafy, it's very country, and you just wouldn't know it actually is there, it exists there. And I think that's the reason why you've got to literally make the journey, because when you look at the pictures and you look at the aerial shot, it doesn't tell you, it doesn't make you feel about whether you actually would like to wake up and look across and see how it goes. We're guiding at £190,000. The good thing about this particular property is that our client has done the groundworks on it already, but because they have interest in another project, this is just not moving in the timescales they want, so they've decided to sell it on, and so subsequently creates a great opportunity for somebody who wants to build their own grand design style of home, be it in traditional construction or in modern steel frame type of construction, which is what is potentially planned here. But a great location, definitely worth it. Nice village spot. It's that sort of chocolate box type of location that you see on the cover of a chocolate box, or the old traditional one. You probably don't see it on any of the new ones because you probably find something animated there. But in the old days, you used to get a nice picture of a chocolate box type of location. And yet very convenient to get onto the M4 and the motorways and so forth. So a great location. Give us a call if anybody wants to look at it, or just go and see it. To be honest with you, the address is on our location, and it's not bolted or gated. You can just go in there, have a wander around, and just send me the price you want to pay for it. That's the bottom line. So that's the good thing about auction. You have a look at the legal pack when it comes on live, and make us an offer that our client cannot refuse. Yeah, a good designer type of house for those that like to see modern, encumbering, older, country, leafy location.
And presumably these designs, Joe, have all got planning approval, so it's just a question of going in
Yeah,
and
it's
bringing the plans to life.
it's oven ready, and you just got to put it in and bake it.
Nice. Great, interesting project. I just wanted to final story today. I just wanted to talk about the Pandora Papers, which has been a story that's hit and slightly rocked the property industry this week. It's a BBC investigation into the Pandora Papers, which is a leak of offshore financial documents and list properties with an estimated value of more than 4 billion. So this is basically people who have bought, secret owners who have bought properties through offshore firms, which is perfectly legal to do, but of course it's a haven for money laundering and people who perhaps wouldn't pass the necessary tests to be able to buy property. And it's interesting that there's a number of well-known people. So Sir Philip Green acquired millions of pounds of the properties in London, whilst the recently sold high street empire that he had faced collapse. The Qatari ruling family bought two of London's most expensive homes through offshore companies, saving millions in tax. A Ukrainian billionaire who's under investigation by the FBI has had hundreds of millions of assets frozen in a fraud case, but was still able to buy £400 million worth of UK property. And all kinds of people are doing this, and not least the fact that Tony and Cherie Blair managed to save £312,000 in stamp duty back in 2017 by acquiring their £6.5 million townhouse, according to these papers. So you don't have to wait for a stamp duty holiday; you just have to go and buy a property through an offshore firm, Joe.
Well, it's not what you know; it's who you know, isn't it, Paul? I mean, Mr. Blair is a high-profile chap. And probably knows the system, created part of the system whilst he was in chair, and actually utilised it. Look, the reality of it is that there are mechanisms and tools available to foreign buyers or wealthy buyers that allows them to own property as investment all over the world, including the United Kingdom, which is one of the safest places to buy, because that's why these foreign investors, be it from Ukraine, Qatari, Philip Green, and the like, all want to buy. The average man in the street, the layman, the you and I's of the world, are not able to use those tools, primarily because we rely on getting a mortgage in order to be able to have our first step onto the property ladder, or our third or fourth, or whatever the scenario is going to be. And so therefore that system exists separately for those people. But those that have the money, and money sitting abroad, or have siphoned funds off their organizations, use different vehicles, different tools in order to buy that. The unfortunate thing is that they are treated with slightly different mechanisms, so they do get the benefit of saving stamp duty like the Blairs did. And stamp duty, again, is a huge saving that they make. But not only that, there are other taxation benefits when they buy them in offshore vehicles, be it in Virgin Islands or wherever it might be that they tend to hold. The problem with that is in a resale, or a resale to somebody in the UK, those people, that's where the cost then becomes exorbitant, and those people then can't afford to buy. So they then got to continue to buy either that vehicle, that ready-made vehicle, and they buy the shares of that and end up buying the asset if that's the only asset in that particular company. And so there are companies created for individual assets. They call them SPVs, special purchase vehicles. And so therefore you might buy, for example, let's just go back to that plot of land. Somebody might buy that, and they might buy that in a company, and then actually, deal with its position within that company. And then when it's finished and done with, either they can sell the company on to the person that buys that, or close that company and clear its debt, including its tax liabilities, which may be mitigated depending on what the cost has been against the purchase and so forth. So that's just clever accounting, if you want to call it that, in order to get to that sort. So people use those tools. They are tools in order to try and get that. And when Pandora Papers show that, I think the real reason behind it is not so much that here is the mechanism. It's more about how that money is got there. And some of that money that is used to buy those properties may be illicit. It may not be the correct way that it's got there. So people use those vehicles in order to buy property with money that they've made from illicit dealings of any sort that might happen throughout the world. And it's money laundering of a different sort, and so people use it as a washing machine for washing their dirty money into property. And of course, again, I only go back to the point that property is still the safest investment. And you ask yourself, why would those people that have all this illicit money that doesn't sit in a cupboard somewhere when they could actually use? Because they know they might have got it, but they can't use it. They can't use it primarily because they've got to justify how they got it. So the only way they can do that is to go and buy some assets, and then become useful, so that they can actually use that money that they managed to make in the first place in the correct way going forward. So there's always going to be that, but sometimes it's those people that fuel the market at the other end. So we talk about buyers and buy-to-let, and people that have the race for space, all of those for ordinary houses. Here are buyers that generate a new vehicle, a new vigor in housing or in commercial property through offshore operations, allowing them to buy assets in order to perhaps tidy their money up that they may have made elsewhere.
It's understood that no laws were broken, we ought to say, in the acquiring of the property for the Blairs, and they were keen to point out that they would have to pay capital gains, of course, if they decided to sell it. Not that I suspect that's going to happen. But it's quite interesting that Tony Blair was previously, in his political career, very critical of tax loopholes, saying that the tax system is a haven of scams, perks, city deals, and profits. And to that end, over the last 15 years or thereabouts, they've bought 39 properties at a cost of 40 million. So no point in ignoring the scams, perks, city deals, and profits, because you might as well get in there and join them if you can't beat them. But there is a serious point here, and that is that this is another thing perhaps that Mr. Gove needs to have on his agenda or his very busy to-do list, sorting out the property market loopholes for foreign buyers through vehicles like this.
Yes, he's got to start using his leveling barometer here, hasn't he?
Yeah.
And start to level the playing field, which I think he'll find challenging. And it just goes to show that if the Blairs found it that the best investment that they could make was property, I can't have anybody bigger than that endorse the fact that what we say constantly here, or I certainly say, is that property is the best form of investment that you'll ever make. Because here is a former Prime Minister and his wife with a £40 million property asset, property portfolio, that tells you that that is the correct way. And it's actually a shame in a way that people like those that are in charge haven't actually found alternative methods for people to consider, and they can control that. But like I said, it suits them not to. And though we talk about it, and it gives me a job in in Property Matters to talk about it and gives you a job because you have to go and do all the digging around. But the reality of it is we would be out of a job if everything was too good, wouldn't it? Property Matters wouldn't exist, and we wouldn't be able to have a go at these people in the nicest possible way. So, yeah, it's not going to change. I can't see it, certainly in my lifetime, and maybe in 30, 40 years' time it might, but I won't be here to tell the story.
No, because if they did, they'd stop donating to the Tory party funds. That's the other point, of course.
That's right.
Anyway, our hour is more than up, Joe. It's flown by as always. So thank you to everyone who has watched with us this week. Hope you've enjoyed the topics we've been talking about. We, of course, will be back again next week at 10 o'clock for another Property Matters.